This week we'll be working on interior doors. In our last video we installed custom window sills and door frames, and in this episode we'll be restoring and installing 3 antique doors, including period correct, hardware and knobs, as well as some other projects. I'm really excited to start working on these old doors. I really love old things, and these antique doors have a beautiful appearance. They immediately take you back to a different era. These doors were made in the early 1900s, and so the house that these doors would have originally been put in had no indoor plumbing. They had no electricity. They weren't electrified yet. The only heat was from a wooden stove or a coal-powered stove or a wooden fireplace. So the house that these doors were built for were completely different. And looking at these old doors and the construction and the style just kind of takes me back to that old era. And so that's why I love them so much, and I really wanted to incorporate them in our home. These 2 doors that were painted are from the late 1800s or early 1900s, and this next door here that still has the original finish is probably from the 1930s or 40s. This door has the same 4-panel construction as the other doors, with the longer panels being on the top, and so it matches perfectly. It appears to have the original finish. It doesn't look like it's been refinished, so it doesn't have like a real thick coat of varnish on it. It's old and thin, and I think it'll be easy to remove. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm just going to sand off this old finish. I'm making sure to wear good respiratory protection while I'm doing this, and I'm going to see if I can take this down to the bare wood and refinish it. I decided just to use a medium grit sandpaper on my hand sander here, and that allows me to get most of the door. All of the big flat surfaces are easy to get with that. I will have to do hand sanding around the edges of those panel inserts where all the detailed milling is, and for that's going to be the most tedious part of this. I just use little pieces of sandpaper, fold it over, and just by hand go back and forth and get in all those little notches and grooves and steps. Takes a good little while, but it's totally worth it. It's coming along really nice. While I was sanding, I noticed that this door was loose. The whole thing just kind of shakes a little bit, and so I decided that it needed to be reinforced. In order to do that, I have a long drill bit that I'm going to use to create a pilot hole for a very large screw that I'm going to put through each corner of the door. It'll go through that side beam and into that cross piece and pull it all back together. And I'm also putting some glue in so that when I pull it back together, that glue will be there. It'll squeeze out any excess, but I'd like to have some more glue in there to help that connection, to help it hold. Here I put in that long screw. I've also recessed the section for the head of the screw a little bit with a Forstner bit so that screw won't stick out. It'll be flush, and in fact, I'll be able to go back in with some filler and fill in over that, and it won't be very visible at all. But these really long screws will make a really nice connection. It's like a 3/16 inch screw, so it's a big heavy duty. This is actually a structural screw. It's a little overkill, but it's doing a great job pulling this door together really nicely. This is the only door that was loose. The other 2 were rock solid, but this one was loose, and I got to looking at the joinery, and it has a more modern type of joinery. Even though it was probably built in the 30s or 40s, it was more modern than the other doors. It used dowels that come from those inner cross pieces and into the side pieces, and they don't go all the way through, and there's 2 or 3 dowels, large dowels, that go into the side, and it's not bad, but it's not as good as the old school joinery, which was mortise and tenon, and so it had come loose, and so I needed to repair it, but the others are rock solid. Well, I was working on that. April's been working on the floors. We finally got some more wax in. We ran out in the first batch and had to order some more. So we ordered some more. This had some chunks in it, so April had to sift it out through a screen, but seems to be working fine now. She's just using a roller to apply it, and that's working really well. The first batch she did just by hand, kind of painted it on or put it on with the rag, so she's trying a little bit different method, and they actually all seem to work, but the roller's really easy and it's working fine, so that seems to be a good way to apply it. When she'd finished up the earthen floors, she decided to go ahead and apply a coat of wax to the entryway/kitchen dining area. So you can see her working on that concrete section over there, applying the same wax to it. It'll be just another protective layer for that. And just a quick follow-up on these earthen floors. They seem to be doing really well, or really durable, and the look is just growing on us over time. We're now bringing in the first two doors, the oldest doors, and they're all ready to paint. We've done the prep on those, and we're going to paint these just a nice white paint. I had considered at one point trying to do some kind of an artistic thing where I leave some of the old decaying paint on there and kind of blend it with some new sanded fresh wood spots. That did not work out at all. They looked horrible. So anyway, we're going back with just an original clean white paint. I really love the joinery on these doors. You know, as a carpenter, I look at the way things are made, and these doors are made so amazingly. So at the time these doors were made, they did mortise and tenon joints. And this door, incredibly, has a mortise and tenon joint that goes all the way through the side piece, which is, you know, up to 6 inches in some places. And so these are incredibly long mortise and tenon joints. And in the top and bottom, where the part of the door, the cross piece, is wider, it has 2 mortises and tenons. And so there's 2 big, long tenons that come all the way through the side piece of the door. And they don't do this kind of stuff anymore, and it's just incredible joinery, and it's so strong, so durable. These doors are, you know, 120, 130 years old, and they're as solid as a rock, and they've been used hard, you know, their entire life, but they're still really solid. I just love this old construction. I'm moving on to installing the last 2 interior door frames. These are both in the master bedroom. One comes into the master bedroom from the living room, and the other is the master bedroom to bathroom door frame. Anyway, I'm using that same technique that I used on the other side of the house with the metal trim around the edges. I really liked the way that looked, and it worked great to use it on both doors in the master bedroom here. So I'm just using those metal pieces, cutting those out and trimming both sides before I put in the wooden frame itself. I'm just getting started to install the door frame here, starting with the header. I will mention that this wall is really thick. This is basically a 2x6 wall. We made this concrete wall here extra thick for extra thermal mass, since if we do put in a stove of some kind, it'll be a rocket mass stove and it'll be right on the other side of this wall, so we wanted extra thermal mass here for that. And so both of these walls are 2x6 construction, so they'll have extra wide door frames. Both of these door frames are the same size, and they're both 36 inches wide in order to provide handicap access. We wanted to have at least one side of the house, you know, one bedroom and bathroom to be completely handicapped accessible, and so we're doing that in the master bedroom. The only problem is that'll make for very wide doors, which if they swing into the room take up a lot of space, and so we've decided to make both of these doors sliding barn doors, which we think will be a really cool feature. And we're using some exterior doors, the only doors that we could find that were wide enough, that are both matching vintage pieces we're really excited about that we'll be mounting and using for the sliding barn doors in this room. While I've been working on that, April has been putting the first coat of paint on those antique doors. And here's a look at the finished door frames in the master bedroom. Really liked how it worked, trimming them out with that metal trim. Really like the look. Now that the floor is done, I can finally put the outlet covers on these floor outlets. I installed 3 of these. 2 of these are in the living room, and they're near couches and seating areas, and then the other one is in the kitchen underneath the kitchen table/island. And I just finished putting the second coat on these doors. This white is really looking nice. And now I'm moving on to prepping the hardware for these doors. I'm using 1 original set of hardware and then 2 new replacement sets made just like the old ones. But I didn't like the color of any of them, so I did some sanding, and now I'm spray painting everything black. We thought that black would go good with the rest of the decor. I did have 3 original sets of hardware, but they were all very badly damaged, and so I was able to take them apart and scavenge enough parts to make 1 working original set. And then I had to buy new replacements for the other 2, but the new replacements really are just like the old ones. They're built exactly the same way, including some of exactly the same parts, so you really can't tell the difference once you get it on the door. These are really fun to work with. I've used these old doorknob sets before. They're made completely different. They work completely different. They have a really cool little keyhole, just like you see in the old movies. They're really fun, and I'm looking forward to putting these on. And while I was waiting for that to dry, I started working on the hinges. These are some cool antique hinges, and I'm just getting them cleaned up and oiled up and ready to put on. I don't have the original screws that came with them, so I'm looking through an assortment of screws I have, trying to figure out what will fit best. So I wanted to show you these hinges that we found. These were a really cool find. We got these at Gerson's, which is a salvage building supply store in Tucson. And we were just out looking around and there was a bucket of these things. Apparently they'd pulled a bunch of them out of an old house. And they looked to me like really good quality hinges. And so I went ahead and bought enough for this house. And sure enough, I got to looking at them. And they have a mark on them that is an SW surrounded by a heart. Anyway, I recognized that mark because I'd seen it on some of my old woodworking planes from like 1920. And that's the Stanley Sweetheart mark. And I didn't know Stanley made hinges, but it piqued my interest, and so we went ahead and bought a bunch of these. And when we got home, April looked these up, and apparently they are made by Stanley, and it is a Stanley Sweetheart hinge. And these hinges were made in about 1930. So very exciting. And so it's really cool to be able to put these on these old doors. These doors are from about 1900. And so these hinges are from 1930, kind of in that same time frame. They're really pretty hinges. They have one side of them twists out, actually screws out. The knob screws out. Actually, it's this side here on this one. The other side just pulls out. Anyway, they're nice, heavy duty, they're really pretty, have a really pretty patina, and just a great quality hinge that is period correct for these doors. Really excited to find these. The paint on these doors is dry and I'm ready to start the installation. The first thing to do is add all the hardware, so I'm putting the hinges on first. It already has the notches cut for these hinges. That's all are there and ready, and so I just put it in the notch, pre-drill the holes for the screws so they don't split out the wood, and then install the screws. Once both of the hinges are installed, we flip the door over and I start working on the latch. I had to do just a little bit of trimming around here to make the new latch fit in. I'm fitting in a new door latch to this old antique door. This door it's probably about 120 years old, and they used a completely different type of door latch. This is a modern replacement, but it's made and patterned after the old design. And so I'm putting this in here. I've had to remove a little bit off of this edge to get it to fit. Now I have it fitting in there okay, fits flush. The problem is the holes don't line up. It's a little bit different, and so on this side I'm okay. You can see I have fresh wood to drill into there. But on this side, part of the old hole is in the wrong place, and so if I try to screw in there, the screw's going to go crooked or something. And so I need to fix that so that I can drill a new hole and put the new screw in a different place. So the easiest way that I found to do that is to get some thick super glue and some kind of a stick or piece of wood, anything will do. Dip it in the glue and then just stick it in. Stick that in as far as I can get it. I'm going to let that dry for a few minutes, and then I'm just going to cut it off, and that just replaces the wood that's there. And now I'll be able to go in with the pilot drill and drill in kind of right on the edge and just basically create a new hole that partially overlaps this old hole. So that's a great way to work around old holes that are in the wrong place. It doesn't take long for that super glue to dry, and I'm ready to remove that stick, so I just kind of scored it with the chisel there and then snapped it off. You could also use just a little knife or whatever you have to snap that off. Once that was out, I was ready to go ahead and put the latch in. I was able to easily pre-drill my pilot holes so that I could get the screws in and not split out the wood or anything. That all went in really well. Next, there's a plate that needs to be placed on either side, and in order to get it into the correct position, I get the doorknob ready with only one side of the doorknob installed, the doorknob and its little shaft, and I put that through the mechanism in order to align this plate correctly. I put it through, kind of wiggle it around, and try to center this plate where the doorknob's in the center of the mechanism, if that makes sense. And then I mark the holes, and now I'm pre-drilling those holes as well. Try to pre-drill everything. And now I'm going to screw those in place. It has one screw in each corner for 4 screws total. And then this plate is ready. Now I'll flip this over and install the plate on the other side the same way. It's really important as you install this second plate on the other side that you get it aligned properly with the first plate and with the mechanism underneath. So you'll follow that same process. You'll get the doorknob and you'll put it through. It's good if you can put the other doorknob on at this time and just move it around and try to make sure everything is really centered, that it's not in a bind anywhere before you put the second plate on. These plates actually hold the doorknob in place and keep the doorknob from wobbling and wiggling in the socket, is the way how these old doorknobs work. So the exact position of these plates is really important. So take your time here and make sure everything is really aligned well. Once I had the second one in place and all screwed in, I did take a little time with some sandpaper, cleaned the paint out of that inner race that holds the doorknob in place so that the doorknob would actuate smoothly. Once all the hardware was on, we're ready to install the door. So we have it up and we're doing a little test fit here, making sure that everything fits and looks good. And then we kind of get it in place as close as we can and mark the position of the hinges. Once that was done, we took the door off and set it aside, and I need to do a little bit of work to prepare for these hinges. This is a little bit of a special situation since these door frames are wider than normal. The back of the hinge will not hang off of the outside of the door frame. They'll actually be seated inside the door frame, and so I needed to make a little bit of a recession for that swollen round part of the hinge where the pin goes through so that it wouldn't conflict with the door frame itself. And so I just used a little tool to cut out a little groove in there, and then we put on the aging compound so that that groove didn't stand out too much. It took a couple fits, a couple tries to get that groove to the right depth, but once we had that in place, there was plenty of room for the hinge to open and close without binding. It fits in really nice even in this extra wide door frame, and we're ready to go ahead and screw it in. Man, look at that antique patina. I love it. Next up is putting in the doorstop, so I had to go back over to my shop and get my miter saw and all the trim pieces that I had cut for that. I measured and cut the top piece for the doorstop first. I found it works best to put that one in first and then the side pieces go on next. So I had April get on the inside of the bathroom and hold the door in the right place, put a little pressure on it so I could get this flush up against the door with the door in the right location. And then I measured. Once that was all just right, held my breath and got a few brad nails in to get that top piece secured. Once you got that, the rest is really easy. While I was in the middle of that, I had a blowout on my air hose. This is the second air hose I've went through since I started this project. They definitely don't make these things like they used to. Fortunately, I did have an extra, so I went and got that, plugged it in, and I'm ready to get on with those side parts of the doorstop. With that fixed, I'm ready to get back to the doorstop. I went ahead and measured both sides, and I'll cut these both to length once I get outside and have both of these pieces ready. I'm just measuring from that doorstop piece that I had just put in all the way down to the floor, trying to get a measurement as I can there and cut that real nice and close so I have a nice tight fit. I'm going to install the latch side first, and I just had April go inside and just put basically one finger of pressure in the top corner of the door to hold it in place. And then I was able to put in the latch side first, and once that was in place, I had her put some pressure on it, and I put the hinge side doorstop piece in last. With the doorstop done, I was ready to install the latch, but I realized that the door latch was facing the wrong direction, and I needed to fix it. And with these old doorstops, you can't just flip the knob around. They only go in one way, so I had to actually take out the mechanism, take it apart, take the case off, and then flip around this little piece here, which is the actual door lock or door latch itself. There's just a little spring in there that I had to remove, and I was able to flip it open. You can also see right below it the mechanism where your little skeleton key goes through, and we'll actually have a skeleton key that will, lock the bathroom. We'll have it hanging there on a little hanger by the door. If you want some privacy in the bathroom, you'll have to take the skeleton key down and lock it. I think it's a lot of fun. Anyway, I've got it fixed. It's in the right orientation now, and I'm just putting it back in. Once the latch was reinstalled, I just need to put the handle back in. The way these work is there's two knobs on either side of a shaft, and so when you want to take the knob out, you just loosen up a little set screw, and then you can take it out or replace it. So I just had to put the shaft back through and reinstall the knob on one side with a little set screw, and then that was done, and I'm ready to move on to the striker plate. I just marked a place on the door frame and started drilling. I used a Forstner bit to hog out most of the material. I then used a hand chisel to square everything off and clean it all up. Then I do some test fits and try to get a feel for the depth that the striker plate needs to be placed. Once I feel like I've got that pretty good, I went ahead and pre-drilled some holes and installed the striker plate. But before I installed it, April touched up the wood with some aging accelerators so that it all matched. And now we're moving on to the next door, which is the guest bedroom door. The door itself is basically a sister door to the last door we did, so it's almost identical in age and appearance. It's a really nice door. I'm putting the hinges on first. I did have to do a little bit of work on this little recess for the hinges. It wasn't quite in the right place, and so I'm just doing a little bit of work with my hand chisel here to make it fit properly. Now I'm pre-drilling the holes and getting ready to screw on the hinges. Once the hinges were on, we flipped it over and I got started on that latch mechanism. This one also had some of the holes that were, wallowed out. They were too big and I couldn't get a new screw to grab in the hole. So I had to do the same thing with the super glue and the dowel rod. You can also use a matchstick or, any little piece of wood that you can stick in there. But that worked great. It filled those holes, and so I'm able to now, re-drill the holes and get it secured really firmly, just like it's the first install. Works great. Now I'm ready to put on those side plates. I mentioned earlier how important it is to align these side plates with the mechanism so that the doorknob doesn't bind on those. I did have a little trouble with these. It's a tighter clearance than you might think. There's a part of the doorknob that fits into a race on the plate, and that race holds the doorknob in place, and there's not very much clearance in there, and it was binding. Once you turn the doorknob to open it, it didn't want to snap closed. And I hate it when that happens. And so I ended up just sanding off all the spray paint that I'd sprayed, and then it worked a whole lot better, and I oiled them up. That did the trick, but it really is a tight tolerance in there, and just the spray paint was too much, and it was causing the mechanism to gum up. So once I did that, it fixed it. Getting ready to mount this door now, I did need to do a little bit of adjustment to this door frame. It was a little narrower at the bottom than it was at the top, so I had to make some fine adjustments. So I spent a little time, did that. Once that was done and it was all squared up, we were ready to install the door. So we brought it over. We're making sure it all fits and it's going to work right. We jacked it up a little bit, and now we're just marking the position of the hinges. We then put a screw in each of the hinges and did some test closings to make sure that it was going to work. This door is really tight. I didn't have a lot of tolerance here, so it took a little bit of doing. I had to do several test fits and try it out several times. Here you can see I have a level. I'm putting that on just to make sure the door is level and it's going to swing properly. But eventually we got it all fitting nicely, and I got the hinges secured. And next it was on to the door stop. I have my miter saw up by the house, which is super handy now. It's nice to not have to walk too far to get to it, because you end up going back and forth a lot, just for little trims, just so you can get everything fitting really nice. So I just have it sitting right outside the door right now. But anyway, I'm going through the same process on the doorstop as I did on the others. I put the header piece on first, and then do the latch side, followed by the hinge side. Now moving on to our third antique door. This is the door between the guest bathroom and guest bedroom. And in order to finish it, we're just applying some of that wood aging accelerator. This is the same stuff that we used on all the trim and the door frames. And hoping it'll have a really interesting look on this wood. This is old wood, it's aged wood. And even though I've got down to the original finish, I'm thinking that it may darken this wood more than it darkened the other wood, just because the wood does have so much age to it. We put 2 coats of this accelerator on, one right after the other, and then I finished it with a good heavy coating of tung oil. Once that was dry, we're ready to install this door. I went ahead and started with the hinge install. It already had the recession cut for the hinge, and so putting those on was a simple matter of getting it in place, marking and pre-drilling the holes, and then screwing it in. Then we flipped it over so I could start on this latch. The latch I'm using for this door is that one antique latch that I was able to kind of cobble back together out of the parts of all the rest. And it turns out that in this particular door, which if you recall is a little newer, maybe in the 40s, it didn't quite fit. It was just a hair too big. And so I needed to take just a little bit off of the inside of this hole that's cut out. And in these old doors, it's a really big hole. It's a large, deep, square hole. And I just needed to take the smallest amount off. But it was not easy to do. I ended up having to do it all with a chisel, and I was just having to be real careful and precise, and so it took a good bit of time, but I finally got it and was able to get it installed. Next, I installed the handle, and we're ready to put the door in place. One thing I really like about this door is the finish, the patina, the color that aged wood accelerator left on this door. It's really a neat looking door. It has a really cool variation of tones on the door. It varies between these really nice reds and browns to even some orange that kind of comes in and out depending on the light. I really love what the aged wood accelerator did to this door. It's so much more interesting than just going over it with some kind of a stain. Gave it a much more interesting natural appearance. It really does just look like a really old door that's aged gracefully over time. Love the way it turned out. We followed the same steps as we did on the other doors to finish up the installation. It is really nice to have all of these doors in place. I really love these antique doors. They add so much to the look of the place. They just bring in some character and interest.
Thank you for watching, and join us again next week to see more progress on our DIY off-grid home build.